Roll call.
Councilman Henwood.
Here.
Councilman Doran.
Here.
Councilman Monty.
Here.
Councilman Vidal.
Here.
Councilman Jordan. And Councilman Bartolomeo.
Here.
Quorum, Mayor.
In compliance with New Jersey's Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231 of Public Law 1975, I hereby declare that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided, specifying that this meeting would be held on November 6, 2013, in the Municipal Building Council Chambers / Conference Room, 55 River Road, Edgewater, New Jersey. Notice of this meeting was sent to the Record and the Jersey Journal and posted in the lobby of the Borough Hall and on the borough's website. Councilman Henwood, will you lead us in the salute to the flag?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The purpose of this evening's meeting is for the council and I to meet with our professionals in regard to the status of the remediation and restoration of Veterans Field. At the October 7th meeting, I advised the council that the public that the borough had received correspondence from our licensed site remediation professional, Terms Environmental Services, that all work is to cease at Veterans Field due to the detection of elevated levels of polyfluorinated biphenyls. I cannot stress enough the importance that this council and I have placed on completing this project and to ensure the health and safety of our residents. My charge this evening goes toward the borough's LSRP, Waterside Construction's LSRP, and to Waterside Construction, who has committed by way of written communication and my personal discussion with Waterside to paying for the cost of the removal and disposal of the PCB contaminated film. Veterans Field was closed in September of 2011, and it is now 2 years later that our community and children have not had recreational facility. This is a disgrace that, as mayor, I find totally unacceptable. I called this meeting so that the governing body would have a better understanding of the events that have led to this project being halted. I simply want to understand what it is we are dealing with and how it will be fixed. This will give us the basis for understanding how this may have happened and to ensure it does not happen again. The council and I want to get the field remediated and reopened as soon as possible. It is my understanding that the borough's LSRP, along with Waterside Construction's LSRP, have initiated the process of sharing information so that a work plan can be developed in order to get this project jump-started again. After we hear from our engineering professionals, we may then proceed to closed session to discuss contractual obligations of Waterside Construction, the firm hired to remediate and restore Veterans Field. We are obligated to open this meeting to the public. However, this meeting was not intended to be a meeting whereby the public can have a dialogue with the mayor, council, and professionals, similar to the informational forum we had at the community center when the field was first closed. The public will have 5 minutes to speak and may comment or pose a question on any municipal matter. At this time, I would like to open the meeting to the public. Mary.
Mary Hogan, 606 Undercliff Avenue. I just wanted to share some information. I know that Councilman Bartolomeo was there at the EPA meeting. We asked them, which was an informal meeting, and we asked them about the statements that were made by the attorney for Waterside and Waterside that it's possible that the water that came up during Sandy might have contained PVCs to reinfect the field. And the EPA indicated, the EPA indicated that if there are other sites, that the water from Sandy did not bring contaminants of that nature to their sites because it was water on the top that came in and not water that had been churned up in the bottom. And so I just wanted to share that with you. The other question I had, and of course I'm sure you'll discuss this when you go into closed, is the bond that I'm sure was posted by Waterside when they did this, rather than waiting for a insurance company to give us the money to do the remediation, that we pull down on the bond in order to do that. But I don't want you to limit it just to the field, because it was indicated that the stuff that was dumped at the ball field came from another site, a local site, they didn't specifically say Edgewater, but that already had a no further action on it by the DEP. We have to know what that site is, because that means whatever site that came from, the construction, if there was any on that site, was unaware that it was contaminated because they were depending on the no further action that was issued by the DEP. So if it was a site in town, and I'm just presuming because the rolling mill had been taken down recently, that that's probably where it came from, that we have another contaminated site that we were not aware of within the town. And that I would hope that the mayor and council goes beyond just the ball field and find out where the site was and even if it wasn't in Edgewater, somewhere in the area, that should be investigated so that DEP becomes aware that they had issued a no further action on that site, but apparently that was not true. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else?
Yes, Harlan Jameson, 1225 River Road.
Could you repeat the name?
Harlan Jameson, 1225 River Road. I live mere feet from the ball field. You had mentioned, Mr. Mayor, that your number one concern is the health of the community. Waterside, I haven't gotten involved in it, but it's been over 2 years of Waterside being in charge of this remediation. They haven't done it. I would think that the council and the mayor, the number one concern should be the health of the community. Why are we not getting rid of Waterside? Let the civil and criminal activity, criminal actions against them proceed, and whatever the initial cost is to the town, let's get it going to get it remediated, to get back and forth. And I only know from the newspaper articles, we're deciding what we'll do with Waterside. Well, how about 2 years and 2 months later? The decision is they haven't been able to do it. For whatever reason, why are we not moving on, worrying about, as you said, the health of the community, and all the other matters, the financial issues, you'll have to resolve. But the issue of Waterside, I'm totally not clear on why that's an issue. Why are they not pushed out, and let's move on? Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Roger Ferguson. I'm a licensed site remediation professional. I'm the president of Penn Jersey Environmental Consulting in Stewartsville, New Jersey, and I represent waterfront construction tonight. I had one of the first temporary LSRP licenses in November 2009, and I got my permanent license in the first week of July 2012. I'm also a stakeholder committee member. I've been involved in writing the technical rules for site remediation with DEP. I'm co-author, co-chair of the Clean Fill and Alternative Fill Guidance document that's been published by DEP, and I'm also on the committee to write the quality assurance guidance documents with DEP. All of these address how remediation is supposed to be done in New Jersey by licensed site remediation professionals. In my professional career, I've also worked on 2 very highly publicized cases involving recycled concrete. One was at the Martin Luther King School in Trenton, where it was rather unfortunate, and the other was the Ford Edison plant. Involved both those materials. In our involvement in this particular matter, material did come from the former Alcoa site. The site did have a no further action written by New Jersey DEP. Okay. New Jersey DEP recently lifted the deed notice that had been placed on that property. Okay. Therefore, that concrete was considered by everyone involved, including the department, to not be regulated, i.e. it was clean. Unfortunately, we have since learned otherwise, both with respect to the Veterans Field property as well as to the Alcoa site itself. One of the gentlemen who works for me is the LSRP of record for that site, and is proceeding with that remediation as we speak. We've been requested to assist the borough and waterfront construction in this matter. We have not yet received any of the real data. We've seen some of the correspondence, but that's all at this time. However, we've been told that we will see data shortly. Our objective is to help develop a remedy that is protective of human health and the environment and to address the contractual issues that are at hand here. If the board has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Ma'am?
Arlene Jameson, 1225 Edgewater. I just want to kind of echo what has been said thus far. You know, for 2 years, we've been breathing in that soil that's been churned over and over on the repairs. And now it seems to be starting all over again with yet more contamination, which I know we went to a meeting the other night of the Qantas Fund. So, I mean, this whole town is full of contamination. And I know that Waterside offered to do this for nothing, but why don't we have someone that we can trust do it and let them pay for it, instead of depending upon them to redo something they couldn't do correctly the first time around? You know, if they're willing to pay, which they should pay, bring someone else in who can do it right the first time and let them pay for it. That's all.
Jay Malikoff, 91 Myrtle Avenue, Edgewater, New Jersey. If we went by that theory, then we might as well take the whole federal website for healthcare down and start from scratch. When you start with a large project, no matter what it is, you sit down, you get a set of plans together, you get your prices together, boom, 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 the contract goes out, and you set up for a deal. When you run into a problem down the road, you can't all of a sudden say, okay, let's throw our hands up in the air and toss these people over the side of the boat and go start with somebody new. Because what ends up happening is ends up costing you 5 times more money than you first started out with. And who in this room can sit here and say that the people who are doing the remediation on this field are not qualified to do it? They've run into a hurricane, they've run into snowstorms, we run into fires, we run into everything else that you can run into in this area. So, you know, my feeling is if the company is willing to take responsibility, number one, willing to take care of the problem and willing to pay for it. So, you know, who in this room should throw a stone at them? Let them start the work, finish the work that they started. Otherwise, it's going to be another 2.5 years before we have children. That's the whole idea of this, is to have children playing on this field. Or the other side of it is it's just, well, government is just some place where you come to complain. So you'll find something else to complain about. Meantime, let's finish the field.
Anyone else? Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing none, I'll close the open portion of the meeting. And Arlene, in response to your question, I do not believe that Waterside Construction is licensed to even clean up the site we're dealing with right now. So it will not be Waterside cleaning up the site, just so you know.
It's comforting.
At this time, I'd ask Mike Neglia from Neglia Engineering Associates to get up. Do you want to, okay, Ron Dooney as well, I'm sorry, Ron.
I think
From
it's
Terms
very
Environmental.
important. Ron, so,
Want me to sit there? Or you want me to
Over
sit?
here.
Okay. Ron, thanks for coming tonight. We understand that everybody's aware of the situation we're in. Can you give us a little history and where the borough stands right now?
Sure. I'm not sure if everybody has seen, there were 2 summary reports that we put out. The first letter was actually just a very brief summary of the fact that we found, we were made aware that some material had come in that we hadn't previously sampled, and when we sampled it, we found that it did contained a couple different compounds, some low levels of PAHs which were on the field already. Again, very low levels of one pesticide, but the main problem was that it contained PCBs, which had been previously remediated in a couple areas of the field as part of the initial remediation before we started the cap. When we realized that that material contained PCBs, we began to take additional samples to start to determine the extent of both horizontal and vertical extent of where the material had impacted. We are still, and I think you saw a second round of results showing that it appears to be have gotten spread around, become mixed or tracked possibly around. And we are still, after the last letter, we've done additional sampling. Most recent round was on Monday. We're waiting on results. We're trying to get a firm handle on the extent, both horizontal and vertical. And also to try to fine tune it to some extent so we know that we're getting it all, but we're not over excavating in areas that we don't need to. So that's what we're in the process of doing at this point. We have notified the DEP as required. We've also notified the EPA. To date, we really haven't gotten a response, is that right, Pete? From the EPA, and part of that I think is due to a backlog because of the furlough. They were furloughed during until what, the 16th or 17th or whenever they came back. So we have not gotten much of a response from the EPA, but they have been notified of this. Again, as required, I've discussed this with the DEP, with the LSRP liaison for PCBs at the DEP. And right now we're trying to finalize the delineation so we know exactly where this extends to. And once we do, we will need to put a work plan together that details exactly how it's going to be addressed. Most likely it's going to be excavated and removed. That is what the most likely, we haven't set anything up that says this is exactly what has to get done, but that's a simple way to do it. It may not be, simple in a sense that logistically digging it out and hauling it away is a simpler process than some of the other alternatives out there. So, that's, in a nutshell, we haven't finished it, but we know it got moved around and maybe tracked around as things got driven through it, equipment got driven through it. I can't say exactly how, but that's where we are right now. We're trying to figure out exactly where it is.
Any questions?
What kind of time frame are we looking at?
We should have the results from Monday back by Monday. If we have those back and that's the end of it, then we can finish a work plan. We need to get, and what we said was probably sometime early to mid next week. Again, we're trying to get all of the information over to Waterside and to Roger, and but at the same time we're trying to finish the delineation. So the answer, I guess, is we need to finish that and get the results next week. We can start, we've already started drafting a work plan, but once we have a firm idea of where it is, it's going to take, depending on which option we go, if we have to have the EPA's actual approval, or if we go a compliance option, we may need to just submit the plan within 30 days or 30 days prior to implementing. So it really depends. The other thing is, the more we fine tune, the more we sample, the more we know exactly where it is. So that's a question that we have to answer: is when do we stop and assume that this whole section over here goes down to 3 feet, or do we keep sampling at 6-inch intervals, and how far out do we go? So we're trying to get most out of the sampling information we can, but we may need to do additional samples for that purpose. So it may be 30, 45 days, it may be more before the EPA is satisfied, or we satisfy the EPA requirements.
In the meantime, while you're fine tuning what needs to be done, is there anything that can be done parallel to the fine tuning? Anything that could be, we can get a jump start on while things are fine tuned, rather than continue to stay stalemate?
Well, we're trying to get the EPA's involvement because they will have to be involved at some point. And that's, Roger and I have not had a specific discussion, but I think we're both aware that the EPA involvement is a possibility and probably will happen. But, that's something we're trying to get their input so we can figure out if they're going to require us to go in a certain direction. For instance, talking with the DEP, they felt that if we followed their sampling guidance, that might satisfy the EPA, but that's not what the EPA rules say specifically, but we're trying to get the EPA's involvement. So that's one thing we're doing in the interim. But until we have it delineated, there's no point in starting to remediate. And again, we have to come to some concurrence that, what we think has to be done is agreeable, I guess. Either way, it has to get done, but how we accomplish it is, there may be some options.
Are there certain parts of your delineation that have already been, I guess, for lack of a better term, set in stone, where you're 100% sure that perhaps the north end, the south end, the east end, or the west end is complete, and there's no further testing that needs to be done in that area? Can you identify a particular part of the park where you might be able to say this is done? We can, if we got somebody's blessing, we can continue working here while we continue to maybe fine tune other areas of the park.
We have it completely delineated. No, I would say, unfortunately, no. And part of the reason that we're still not sure is because as I mentioned before, the nature of the dust and whatnot, it could get tracked very easily. Even though it wasn't mixed in certain areas, it could just get tracked there by equipment moving across it and then into a different area. That's what we're trying to make sure we know exactly where it is. So that was the reason that I felt that it was necessary to shut down the job until we knew that they were not working in areas where, that they were not working in areas where the PCBs existed, and we're still not completely delineated. So I don't know where those areas. I can't say this area over here to the east is clean.
Ron, is it safe to say that, and to follow to his point, and I guess when not the fine tuning of it, not the delineation of it, once that's complete, the EPA's in, it's been agreed upon, and both LSRs are saying, yeah, this is the way the world is, the EPA has written off on it. Could there be parallel efforts going on at some point? It's just asking, could there be?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say
So,
yes.
and we're talking about, in this case, the time frame of getting it done. That's number one. Number two, is it safe to say that if there is agreement between both licensed companies, that this will better enhance our chances of getting EPA approval and move forward?
Well, I think, yes, I guess the answer is if we're in agreement, that is
Right.
certainly the best of all worlds, that we agree and we go, and the EPA agrees that our plan is acceptable, then yes.
Well, I would simply urge that, this is, to the mayor's point, beyond anything we imagined, and we're all sick over it, and we want you guys to move on as quickly as possible to help us get this thing done. It has to happen.
Is there a way, Ron, that part of this field can be open? Like the Little League field be open? The kids could play on the Little League field?
If you indicate where you're, most concerned with opening it, could we focus on that and try to cordon that area off? Certainly a possibility. We'd have to do specific sampling in those areas, first, I guess, to say, okay, if we want to open this area, and I'm not sure which areas you're thinking of. I mean, some of the areas clearly are impacted, so the answer would be no, but, we have to get, in order
The
to
whole thing
start
has to be
this.
fixed.
Well, in order to start it, we can't just move it over here. We gotta have a work plan, we gotta have a health and safety plan, we have to have all the controls that are necessary before we start moving it. So you might say, well, if there's 6 inches on the ball field, can we just move it over there, push it into the other area and open up the ball field?
Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm under the assumption the Little League field was not impacted from the beginning.
I don't,
The little field is the north.
yeah, well, I mean, we had to, but for lack of wanting to sample every square foot of the field, once we did the PCB hotspot remediation of 4 spots in the hydrocarbon area, that was the black oozing material that we talked about.
The original.
The original 5 areas that we remediated, we made, as was allowed, we made the assumption the rest of the field had historic fill contaminated with PAHs, and/or possibly metals, just because that's what the reg says, but we had identified PAHs in pretty much all areas of the field. But then one of the areas, the ball field, is probably not, I would say the one area is not impacted, right?
There are areas that are adjacent to it, outside the fenced area, very low levels. The actual field has not, the smaller field has not been tested because visually it didn't look like any of the material was received there.
So I guess an answer long-winded, we could potentially cordon that off, but, you know, before we do that, we're focusing on visually and other indicators that might say this area could have been somehow impacted by some of this material, the dust or otherwise. But if there's no evidence, we haven't focused on them. But if you wanted to open a portion of the field, I would suggest that we take some samples there and make sure, even though visually there's no reason to suspect that it's a problem, I wouldn't want to open up and find out that there wasn't a visual indicator, but it was there anyway. Because the dust is the problem. I consider that's part of the whole problem. When it gets very dusty, it doesn't take much to spread, you know, to be above the standard, which the residential standard here for PCBs is 0.2 parts per million. And, you know, we've identified some areas, some samples, I should say. How big an area they represent is hard to say because it's not very homogeneous. But we've got, I think, 450 something parts per million. So, you know, if you have some concrete dust that has 450 and you drive through it a couple times, or, you know, it could easily track something that's above 0.2 somewhere else. And you might not see that dust necessarily. We have been monitoring for dust, you know, and have not had any exceedances. We're also going to be sampling as we do this for PCBs actually in the dust in the air, but the dust monitors have not indicated ongoing exceedances of anything at this point.
So Mr. Dooney, where this dust may have gone, it's just surface contamination, and would this be as easy as just scraping off the surface of a couple of inches and that takes care of things?
Well, in some cases it may be, and the DEP requirements are you sample in 6-inch intervals. So while it may have some high levels in the first inch, when you take 6 inches and you mix it and homogenize it and analyze it, if the first inch has 100, you're going to be above 0.2. So even though it might not be down at 6 inches, that's the way
So
you're sampling.
what would you do at that point there? Would you go down 6 inches?
You would have to say, yeah, well, that's what you take your next sample at 6 to 12.
Okay.
And again, this is part of the whole thing. I mean, if the material extends down somewhere into the 6.5 inch, 7-inch range, I mean, your 6 to 12-inch sample could be bad. So you almost have, that's why they're doing it at 6 inches, because it's hard to define a 1 or a 2-inch layer of this and remediate it. But that's what that's what the requirements are. So that's what we're doing. You know, we've been down to what's our deepest, 2.5 to 3 feet.
And then Monday I did the 4.
And we did some deeper ones on Monday, so we're trying to make sure that we know if it, you know, stops at 2.5 to 3 or 3 to 3.5. We should be good at the 4-foot interval. That will tell us it stopped somewhere above that.
And could I ask you, what's the methodology of frequency for the testing as the product's brought into the site? I mean, is it per truck, per
It's per
origination?
source site. The clean fill requirements are, for each source site, you have to take each one separately. It's 1 sample per 20 cubic yards for the first 100 yards. These are numbers that are default numbers if you have no reason or ability to use a lower alternate frequency. It's one every 20 yards for the first 100, one every 100 yards for the first 1,000, and then one every 1,000 yards after that, up to 10,000, which then you can, by judgment, decide to lessen the frequency, but that's the requirement. So each site that you take it from, you have to follow that.
Okay. And what was that, again, how did that work out?
It's one every 20 cubic yards for the first 100 yards, one every 100 yards for the first 1,000 yards, and one every 1,000 yards thereafter.
And you go to this site and test there, or is it the truckloads coming in?
That has normally been, yeah, what we have tried to do is test a couple of tests. If we know there's 4,000 or 5,000 yards gonna come from a site, we take a few tests because it doesn't make sense to go and take what amounts to 18 samples and find out they're all bad. So we take a couple of representative samples if they're good. Then we say, okay, how many yards are you gonna bring in? And we go test, you
And
know.
let them come in, and then...
And then let them come, yeah. Right.
I just hope that it's understood that our amount of questions or lack of questions are, because we've been wrapped around this for weeks now. I think we all have a pretty good idea that we know about what's going on, and just once again, to this young lady's point, that we live in a really toxic area from border to border, and it's a tough thing we've been dealing with for years, and we're in another tough situation right now, and we have to get out of it. And everyone's got to, put their
That's been made clear to us. We're trying
expertise in
to,
and get it done.
The history of the whole, it's been rich with, different things.
well, I mean, that's where the park is fill and filled land, and that's
Moved
why this all
around and
started.
moved around.
But I mean, the PCBs kind of kick it to a different level as evidenced by, the ability or the necessity to bring the EPA in at some points, where normally that wouldn't be the case. But it's been made clear to us, do everything as fast as you can. So we're trying to do it as fast as we can and do it correctly and make sure that and just recently started the dialogue, to bring, us all on the same page and make sure we were working, together
As
to get this
efficiently
done.
and together,
Yeah,
and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's been the charge, and that's what we're
I
trying
would
to do.
just say, listen, we're 2 years closed, and, the number one concern for anybody here, everybody here, is the residents surrounding that property. We've spoken about possibly working your way off the field, if there's a plan we could implement to possibly use some of the field as early as possible, but at no time, my kids will be down there and their classmates will be down there, and we're not looking to rush this to the point where there are any question marks at the end of the day. When we cut that ribbon to open that field, we're expecting a guaranteed clean field for our children to play on and for everybody to enjoy in this purpose. So, to speed it up, we're not looking to speed it up. We're looking to make sure it's done effectively and correct. But at the end of the day, if you could sit down in the next week or so, I know we were supposed to have a meeting yesterday with the LSRP representing Waterside Construction. It didn't happen. My major concern to you would be that we need this to happen, and we need to come up with a plan that you're comfortable with, and whatever we need to do to fast track this field being open for our children, with every question mark answered, no concerns for our children being on that field. We're asking you to, speed it up now, and to the point where I was a little disappointed to hear that we didn't meet with the LSRP from Waterside, and whatever reasoning we have, that's fine. But from here on out, I know time is of the essence, and we're looking to, make whatever progress we can to benefit our children and the borough.
I understand, and I'll be getting information out as I can make sure, review and know what I'm sending out is complete and correct and whatnot. Start working with Roger.
And Ron, just
before, but we'll talk tomorrow.
And I understand. I know you're still reviewing everything, so you have to feel comfortable before you present it to anybody else, and I'm aware of that. So we're behind you. as bad as it is, we're thankful we caught it, and, you know, it's to protect every resident in this town and the children that will be playing on that field, so.
And Ron, just confirm one more time, the EPA will sign off on the eventual final plan, correct?
They may not have to, depending on which
But
approach
they
they
have to, they
take,
will.
but they will have to be notified, or they will have to have a plan provided to them, almost certainly.
Got it.
They may not have to actually approve it,
Understood.
Who determines the approach that's gonna be taken?
well,
Because you said it would depend on who determines the
I
approach.
mean, we're gonna determine it in conjunction with talking to them. I mean, there's different approaches that the regulations and guidance allow you to take. Some would require you to take a lot more samples if you don't want their involvement, and you just want to submit a plan to them. But again, the DEP's indicating, you know, this is not up to me. I mean, on the DEP front, they would say, you're the LSRP, but they will give guidance, they'll give technical consultation. I spoke to that person at the DEP, his name is Kevin Schick, and Kevin said, I don't know that you're gonna have to follow that compliance requirement, because that's hundreds, if not more, samples to follow the EPA compliance. So we may be able to get the EPA to say, yeah, we could get away with less, and if you do this, you don't need our prior approval, but you need to get us a plan. So that's what we're trying to, you know, get an answer to. And one other thing with the health part, one thing we've done, although we've been monitoring the dust, we've also, everywhere we've identified the PCBs, we have covered it with plastic, so that the dust that you might see generated is not from the areas where the PCBs.
Is it safe for the surrounding areas where these people are, you know, living and stuff?
That's my point.
You can ensure-
We've had
So you can
perimeter
be assured,
monitors,
you know.
we put monitors inside the building.
Right.
You know, and when we go to the PCB cleanup,
Okay.
we will actually be sampling the air for PCBs with filter media, so that not only do we know what the dust concentrations are, we know what the PCB concentration in the dust is. But just to make sure, because we closed the park, so it's hard to close the park and then go water it down. So we have been covering everything with plastic. Waterside started that initially before the site was closed, and my personnel have been doing that as we get the results back. So everywhere we know or suspect that PCBs exist above the standard, it's covered with plastic.
Have we had any issues with monitors going off, air monitors going off? I've been down there a lot. I had that.
No, I mean, there's an occasional dust blow, but, you know, and again, the dust, the whole idea of the monitors is to make sure you're not getting a continued exceedance, and if you are, you're supposed to do something to mitigate it, like water it down or stop your activity that's generating dust. We have not had a prolonged dust problem. We've had, you know, I mean, if you stand there, sometimes the wind blows and you get some dust, but we're monitoring the dust and we haven't had any continuous exceedances.
So right now, we are waiting on the plan of action from terms, correct?
We're waiting on results right now, and if those results are successful in delineating, and if we don't, again, the question of the more samples you take, the more sure you are how much material, but there's, you know, cost benefit, both time and money, in how many samples do you take? Is there some reason to take them every, you know, 50 square feet versus 25 versus 100, or, you know, and the more you fine tune it, the more you know exactly what you have. I mean, in this case, we may want to do some more fine tuning because the cost of disposal is so high that, you know, but that, again, would take time to do that. So that's one of the things, once we get it, we're going to say, here's what we have, and, you know, talking, you know, with Roger and Waterside and say, you know, if we don't take any more, we're going to have to assume that this whole area goes down to 3 feet. If we want to figure out if it really goes to 2 feet and half of it, we might have to take more samples. So that's really part of what we have to
Rather
do.
than do more trucking. If
Right.
you don't need to.
Right.
A lot of work to be done on in that analysis.
Right, the
Yeah.
analysis.
Let me get to it.
And when you do this, and you tell them, whoever is going to do it, how far they have to go down, is there a test done then that it's
Yes.
clean And
I
we
see.
put our clean fill on and we're not gonna have this anymore.
We would have post-excavation samples when we're
And
done.
that has been done?
No, that will be done after the
Has
excavation.
it been done when some of this project was being done?
Oh, in the beginning when we remediated the hotspots?
No. There has been some cleanup spots.
Yeah, those were the
There has been, I
hotspots.
see asphalt, I see other pavers, I see sidewalks. When that was given the okay to cap it, per se, if that's the right word, was it tested?
Except for some of the areas that the parking lot was paved right around the same time this material came in, there's some areas under a parking lot that are problematic, but the other areas,
Not under the parking lot that have been remediated already and clean fill on them? Are those
Well,
affected? I have not seen
yeah, as long as the
a
clean.
site map.
No, well, we didn't need to take post-excavation samples because the park was contaminated, we had PAHs across the whole park, we said. So we're gonna cap it. So we don't take samples before we put the cap down, but where the cap goes, if it's gonna be under asphalt, we didn't need a liner necessarily, although some of it has a liner. But we put a liner, then we put clean fill. Now, the part of the problem is, some of the stuff on top of that clean fill may contain this material. Is it under areas that have been completely capped? There's some under the parking lot. Is there some under anything else that the cap is completed? I don't think so. Not that I know of.
No, not this cap.
So where we're delineating it, the only place that I know of that has been for, to use the term we're using, has actually been capped. Because the cap is in progress in most of the areas, because most of the cap is a soil cap. Where it's an asphalt cap, some of the base course, I guess, was down in some of the parking, and that area underneath has some issues. But other than that, I believe that everything else that has been capped in its final position, if you will, or elevation, I'm not aware of a
Okay.
problem in other areas.
What about the new building?
There are some PCBs associated with the field house area. I don't know, was any of your other sampling done there, deeper?
No, not one that,
So, I mean, again, that would be an area to fine tune and see if, if it's just under one little section by the field house, then that would obviously be a good thing, right? But there are some there, but I'm considering that not completely, I mean, it's framed, I mean, it's in and
Right.
part of it up, but it's not like the field is finished grade and we have to rip out something. Just really that parking area is, I think, the only one that has an actual cap over it.
How long does the testing take if you go down 6 inches, you were saying, you take a sample? When that goes out, how long does it take for that?
The standard is 2 weeks. We've been running them on a week or 72 hours,
Oh, all right.
trying to do that.
That was gonna say, that's gonna take some time.
Yeah, well, it's normal, I mean, most labs are 2 weeks, some will do them on a week turn. You can pay premiums to get them done on 72 hours, but depending on how many you have, and, but most of the labs can expedite them. Usually 72 is the typical expedite. If you had to, you could probably do them quicker, but then they charge you that much more.
And Ron, please, if we're paying premiums, let's make sure we use it as a premium.
Yeah,
We
well,
use it in a timely
yeah.
fashion, because it doesn't make sense to pay the extra money and have it sit. I'm not suggesting it has,
And how
but
far
but the whole testing process is expensive.
And how far would you go?
Needs to be done.
Meaning, say you were gonna do 6 inches, I'm envisioning if you had to wait and then do another 6 inches. So I guess the question is, are you going 10 yards by 10 yards to get a time frame?
Well, we're doing it partly visually, and, if we think there's evidence, visual evidence that says it looks like this material that seems to be, every time we see it, we have a hit, we want to go further than that. So we might go 25 feet in this direction because we think it's still in that 25 feet. That's where if it's clean, we could back out, or we could go 5-foot intervals and say, oh, it's still dirty, I thought it was gonna be dirty, let's go another 5 feet, or you go 25 feet. And that may be where maybe we can shrink it, but again, you know, with this material, we're trying to use those visual cues, because unlike, you know, gasoline or oil or something, you can't screen it in the field. I mean, there are test kits that you can use, assay kits and whatnot, but for the most part, the PCBs, I mean, you can't just tell where they are visually. In this case, we're using the concrete and other brick fragments that appear to be consistently associated with this as a visual indicator.
Okay.
I know Ms. Hogan spoke about the PCBs in the river, and is a PCB a PCB? So the ones underneath the river and the PCBs that are in this concrete, are they equal?
There are different aerochlores of PCBs. That's a different level, slightly chemical different composition, and that might tell you something about the source or the age of the PCBs, maybe to some extent, or mostly the source. The PCBs, I mean, we don't know. I don't know what was in the sediment in the river, if anything, is right off the coast, or that it got entrained. But the material here, you know, appears to be related to concrete.
Is of a different strength?
But that, you'll be able to clearly just determine the difference.
We go sample the PCBs in the river if they exist. But I you know, this is not. I mean, from my observations and visually, my experience, I mean, this appears to be related to the concrete. It's not. There's no indication of a layer of sediment that settled here, and if it had, I think we're above that level.
Well, if I'm them, I'm gonna wanna find that out, because, you know, if I'm gonna take responsibility for it, I wanna make sure it's mine, and I'm just saying that's just a normal business practice. I mean, so I think if you're doing all this testing, we should know the difference between the PCBs, I would think.
You know,
I'm not a
yeah.
professional.
I mean, and that's something that, you know, we probably can discuss with the.
Well, I'm sure that's what you will discuss.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it at this point is, you know, how do we get the field,
That's right.
you know, done, and that's the main criteria right now.
Most safely and as quickly as
Yeah,
possible.
and I mean, the PCBs are there, we know they're there.
Right.
They've been there.
And we need to get rid of them.
Mhm, right.
So that's what we're focused
So
on.
we need to know who's gonna pay for it too. I mean, let's not get away
No,
from that.
I'm not ignoring that, I'm just, right now focusing on, let's figure out where they are.
Right.
Come up with a plan.
And what it will take to get rid of them, and then, you know, as part of the ongoing, we'll try to assess if, you know.
Got it.
Ron, was there any impact with the telephone poles coming down onto the field, the transformers? Is there any kind of contaminant that may have added to this?
I
that you
mean,
know of?
I've heard, not that I know of, I've heard that there was some transformer,
Oh, there was.
you know, whatever,
Yeah.
but this stuff, number one, I mean, we're finding it in a lot of areas, and again, transformers would be, it's a dielectric fluid, it's an oil that, you know, again, would have properties of hydrocarbons as well. It would be visually and otherwise would be, I think, obvious if the PCBs came from a transformer, because it would be related to a soil that is got oil.
You'll be able to know that.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
that.
scientific
You're
reason.
telling me that.
Yeah, and it wouldn't, you know, again, it wouldn't spread like this material seems to have spread. So I would say there's no indication that it's from the
That was
transformers.
affected.
From my perspective and from what I've seen so far, I would say that that's not the case.
Let's get her done.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ron. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This time, I'd like to go into closed session. Ask for a motion to go into closed.
So moved.
Second. Roll call.
And that's to discuss. To discuss or negotiation. Okay, moved by Councilman Monti, second by Councilman Bedell. Councilman Henwood?
Yes.
Councilman Doran,
Yes.
Councilman Monti,
Yes.
Councilman Adele,
Yes.
Councilman Bartolomeo. Motion passes 2-0.